Okay, so some time ago I did a tutorial about triggering a climb animation when a character grapples onto a ledge. A few things have changed since that was in Unity 4 and we're using Unity 5 now, so I figured I'd do an updated one with somewhat better graphics. That one had just the stick figure. This character is slightly more detailed. So what we're going to do is that one actually only had one animation. We're actually going to cycle through several. So there's going to be an idle animation, a jump animation, a walk animation, and a climb animation, and about how they all relate to each other. So I'll probably do like 3 videos or so. This first one is probably just going to set up the animation, and then we'll go from there. So first, let's just create a floor. So create empty, and we'll call this floor. And all we're going to do with this is put on physics 2D, because we're in the 2D environment, and we're going to put in a box collider. This is basically just so that the character has something to stand on. You don't need an actual image or an actual model for a solid object. You just need that box collider. So that's the floor they're going to stand on. Now let's create our empty object. We'll call this hero. We're going to add rendering, and we're going to add Sprite Renderer. And what we're going to do, down here you notice that there is a whole bunch of animation frames. I'll get into that in a few seconds. We're just going to use one of these for the idle image. Now there's going to be an idle animation. This is just what appears if the animation is disabled. So let's go ahead, add physics 2D. We'll add a box collider. Now see how the box collider is really large around the character. The character's small, but the box collider is that big. The reason for that is the actual frame that the character exists in is 3 times their own height. So let's talk about that. So first, let's make this smaller, because it doesn't need to be that big, and then we'll talk about why there's such a huge frame. Okay. Let's go to the climb animation. So this is the first frame. So what they're going to do is there's lots of ways to make an animation like this work. I chose to put the burden onto the animator themselves. Still me, I'm the one who drew it. But what my point is that you can either make minute changes in the y coordinate, in this case since they're moving up, or what you can do is you have all the movement, vertical movement, be done in the frame itself, and that way you don't have to change the y coordinate. So you can't see it because they are, it's going to be one frame at a time, but that hand is going to be at the same level. So when you open up this one, the hand is at exactly the same level, so they're anchored there. And since the hand is at the same level, that means the character is rising up in the frame. That's why the frame is so big. They're going to actually stand a full character height above of where they were. And with the foot coming up, that too is going to anchor at the same location. Here, the hand and foot are at the same location, but again, the character's torso is higher. Higher still. At this point, the hand starts to lift up, but the foot is at the same location. So the foot is the new anchor now. And they're climbing higher. And this last one, even before we open it, you can see how much higher in the frame they are. So that's why the frame is so big, is because rather than messing with the actual y coordinate, actually trying to have them move in tandem with the animation frame, you're technically not moving the character themselves. Their Y coordinate is going to stay the same throughout that animation. It's not until that last frame hits and then you jump to the idle animation that the Y and the X coordinate will move. So we'll get into more of that in a few minutes. But I just want to point out that that's why the reason why the frame is so huge is because the character's vertical movement is actually technically not vertical movement because the Y coordinate is not going to change. They're just moving within that frame. So let's now look at animating them. Oh, and something else to keep in mind, the camera is at -10 by default. The hero, for whatever reason, when you create a new object, it also puts it at -10, so you won't see it. So you just have to put it in front of the camera. So let's switch to 3D view briefly. So here's the camera at -10. When the character was created, they were also -10, so the camera wouldn't see it. This is the Z-axis, okay? So you just need to move it to a higher number so it's in front of the camera. Okay, so now let's animate them. So let's click on Hero. Let's click on, and again, you can see that larger frame. We're going to go to Animation. Now, if you don't have Animation in Animator, you can just right-click and choose Add. Now, you don't see an option for Animator. So what you can do is, in a few minutes, we're going to add an Animator component. Once you add it and you click on it, then this tab will appear. So we're going to click on, so with the hero selected, we click on Animation, and it tells you to begin animating hero. So it's telling you the name of the object that is selected. So we're going to click on Create, and we're going to start, we'll call this Idle. Now this is the frame rate here, way too high. Let's change this to something like 12. And don't worry, it's not etched in stone. You can come back and change this at any time. So we're going to click on Hero Idle and Hero Idle. Now with a cycle like this, what happens is you go out, but then you want to come back. So it's easy enough just to grab those frames and repeat them. There's probably a way to make a sequence play in reverse, but honestly, this really doesn't take up any more memory doing it this way. So why go through a complex reversing animation when it just takes a few seconds to drop in the frame? You don't want to drop in the first frame because then, since that first frame is here and it's cycling through, it'll play through and then jump back to the first frame. Well, unless you want that frame to be played twice, you don't want to repeat it. It'll cause a pause. So that's the first one. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a second one. So right here, here's the name of the animation, create new clip. And this one's going to be called Jump. Technically, it's not. It's going to be a single frame repeated over and over again because honestly, I just didn't want to take the time to draw a jumping animation sequence. So what we're going to do is for the hero climb, we're simply going to take that and we're just going to repeat it. It really doesn't matter how many frames because we're going to set up a condition that just says keep repeating until a certain condition is met. All right, so that's all we really need for this video is those two animations. So once you've created an animation, if you click here on Animator, sorry, there we go. I didn't think I added it, but there it is, Animator. This is kind of messy, and I actually kind of preferred the way Unity 4 looked, but this is what we've got. So the orange one is the default, okay? And it's idle. It was the first one that we created. And then this is jump. So what's going to happen is we're going to want to go from idle to jump. So you right click and you choose Make Transition, and you click on that. Now you right click on Jump, Make Transition, and go back to idle. So what this is saying is I can go from idle animation to the jump animation, and I can go from the jump animation to the idle animation. So how does that happen? See up here, parameters, go ahead and click on the plus sign and choose trigger, and you're going to just call this jump trig. So, and the naming is not arbitrary. A float is that, just that. It's a number. Int is a number. Boolean, uh, I never use, but yes or no. Same for a trigger. It's also a true or a false statement. So you're just going to say set this to being true, and then it will perform a certain task. In this case, the jump trigger is going to be used to go from idle to jump. So click here. And honestly, again, I really don't like the way they laid this out for Unity 5. We're going to click on the plus sign here. So there's jump trigger. You notice there's nothing to set because a trigger is just yes or no. It's either been triggered or it hasn't. Here for settings, no exit time. We just want it to immediately go from one to the other. And I don't think we have to change anything else. If we have to, we'll come back. But for the moment, I think we're okay. Now, we don't have to change anything here because by default, jump is going to automatically come back to idle based on time. So we'll probably have to change how long this lasts, but that's about it. Okay, so we created our two animations. We created transitions for them. We created a trigger. Now we actually have to use that trigger. So here's what we do. We start coding. So right click, create, C#, and we'll call this actions. We're going to click on the hero character. We're going to drag and drop actions, and we're going to open that up. So what we need to do is in this script, which is attached to the hero, we need to say, all right, let's use that trigger. We're setting that trigger to be true, and then therefore the animation will change. So let's base it on a keystroke. So public key code, and we'll call this jump skill. We'll save it. It'll show up over here. Jump is usually the space button, so let's just do that. Go back to the script, and now we're going to check to see if that button is pressed. So if input dot get key down, we want get key down because get key down is true for precisely one frame, and that's the first frame that the key is pressed. If you do just regular get key, that's a rapid fire, and this will be true over and over and over again. We don't want that. We want a one-off true. And it's the jump skill button. All right, so if that is true, if jump skill has been pressed, then, all right, so get component. As we said, these are called components. So what component? The animator. We're setting that trigger, and we don't have to choose a value because the trigger is just yes or no. It's been set. Okay, so if you press the button, then the trigger is set. So that should work. So let's run it. So there's the idle animation. It's a little hard to see because they're kind of small, but that's the idle animation. Now, if I hit the space key, they should go into the jump animation. And they did. But there's a bit of a delay. So we are going to have to go into that. And it also doesn't stay in that animation for long enough. So you could say, oh, wait a minute, they didn't jump up. The actual vertical velocity is something entirely different. We're just dealing with the animation itself, and that's one of the recurring themes I really want to impress upon you is the difference between the motion the character is making and the actual vertical or horizontal movement. So like I said, in this case, you see them climbing vertically, but it's happening within the frame, and there's no actual changing of position going on for the object itself. Okay, just a brief splice there. Just how to get rid of the has exit time. So when you're in the animator, how to get rid of the has exit time, because if that's checked, so again, we have the transition highlighted, okay? So you're changing in an attribute of that transition from idle to jump. See how there's the delay? Now we get rid of has as exit time. Go. And the reason why sometimes it seems like there isn't a delay is because it's based on where they are in the cycle. So again, you need to get rid of so when you're highlighting the transition, you have to get rid of has exit time. We set the other settings as well to zeros. And now it's right away all the time. So the other time, sometimes it was right away, but that was because it was coincidence at the end of the cycle. Okay, so I think that's it for this first video. So you've now seen how to have multiple animation sequences and how to have a trigger setting you changing from one to the other, and then to return back to the original, it's just a matter of the timer. So when we're on Animator and we click on this, it by default has this fixed duration and has an exit. We just pumped up the time to make sure that it had a sufficient amount of time to do the jump the entire distance it needed to jump. So that's it for this first one, and we'll pick it up with the actual grappling onto a ledge in the next one.